Susan Combs. She's a Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. Susan serves as the state's treasurer, check writer, tax collector, state procurement officer, and revenue estimator. That's a mouthful. Since being elected actually in Texas in 2006 and re-elected in 2010, she's been driving sweeping reforms in state purchasing and contracting. Number two, we have the honor... Oh, there we go. Okay, I thought you were all coming out at once. So give Susan a round of applause. She's honorable. Number two, we have the Honorable Steve Pearce, who currently serves as the U.S. Representative for the 2nd District of New Mexico, serves as Chairman of the Congressional Western Caucus, and is champion of small business, so we appreciate that. Any small business owners in the house? Show of hands. Okay, like 2 people. It's lunch break. Finally, it's Jeanette Hernandez Prenger is the founder, president, and CEO of Select, one of the top 500 Hispanic businesses in the U.S. She was appointed in 2002 by President Bush to serve on the SBA Regulatory Fairness Board and has served counsels for Senator Roy Blunt and Congressman Sam Graves. There we go. Come on, give him more energy than that. And finally, this one's special, became the first woman to lead a Fortune 20 company, serving as the chairman and chief executive officer of Hewlett-Packard from 1999 to 2005. She was named Fortune's most powerful woman in business for 6 consecutive years in 2010. In her first-time candidacy, you'll love this, she ran against 4-time Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer, one of the most recognized business leaders in the world, and a leader who champions innovation, competitiveness, and of course, job creation. Carly Fiorina is here. Let them all know you love them.
Thank you and good afternoon to those of you who are hanging in here. Thank you for hanging in here. We have a really exciting and fun panel for you this afternoon. As the title suggests, we are not here to discuss the future of the Republican Party, actually. We are here to talk about the state of American business. Thank you. Last year when I addressed CPAC, I actually talked about technology. And I talked with you about technology because it has fundamentally altered the pace of change for our communities and for our nation, because technology empowers the individual in truly historic ways. And technology also overwhelms large, centralized bureaucracies, think our U.S. government, rendering them over time increasingly incompetent, even if they remain powerful. And of course, as we will hear from at least one of our panelists, technology is also a tool to enforce transparency and accountability. As I mentioned, today's topic is really the state of business in America today, but I start with technology because it sets the frame for everything we need to do, and it limits the time, frankly, in which we have to do it. I want to start, if I may, with 2 anecdotes. Recently, I was on a Sunday morning newscast this week with George Stephanopoulos, and I had the opportunity to debate Paul Krugman. You know Paul Krugman. And in the course of this debate, I made what I thought was a pretty basic statement. I said, you know, when we think about the health of the U.S. economy, we have to remember that a private sector job and a public sector job are not the same thing. A private sector job pays for itself. A private sector job creates other jobs. A public sector job is paid for by taxpayers. I thought it was a pretty obvious statement. But later, my staff was contacted by a reporter who felt that he needed to fact-check this statement. Seriously. It was interesting to me because it said how little so many people understand what makes the economy go. And I think one of our fundamental issues in this country is we have a lot of people setting policy that impacts our economy, but they don't understand how the economy actually works and the impact of that policy. My second anecdote is this. In a recent poll, fully 70%, 70% of small business owners said that they thought the federal government was hostile to them. Not neutral, not negative, hostile to them. Remember that figure and remember that statement. Here we have the stock market achieving record highs day after day after day. We have large companies in many, many industries reporting record profits, and yet the state of our economy is not good. We know these statistics, but they are worth repeating. There are 12.3 million who are still unemployed. 1 in 6 Americans lives in poverty, and that burden falls most heavily on women and their children. There are 48 million Americans living on food stamps. We have lost 6.4 million full-time jobs in this country. 8 million Americans are working part-time and they would rather work full-time, and 10 million Americans have dropped out altogether. Why? Because small business and entrepreneurship is the engine of growth in this American economy. We know, and you will hear inspiring stories from some of our panelists today, we know that every American gets their first chance in a small business. We know that wave after wave of immigrants get their first handhold on that first rung of the American ladder by opening a small business. I started out in a little business with 9 people as a secretary, and my story is not unique. It is the American story. Whether it is the taqueria or the deli on the corner, the dry cleaner, the auto mechanic, the IT services business, the oil services business, small business is the engine of growth for this economy. Small businesses create over 2/3 of the jobs in this country. Small and new businesses employ over half the people. I was privileged to be the chief executive of Hewlett-Packard for 6 years, and during that time we generated 11 patents a day. But do you know that small businesses innovate at a rate 11 times that of big businesses? In other words, it is small businesses that are the engine of growth in our U.S. economy. And today, remembering all those terrible statistics I just covered for you about the number of people unemployed, the number of jobs we have lost. Why? Because today, fewer small businesses are forming and more small businesses are failing than at any time in the last 40 years. Why is that? If you ask them, they will tell you it's just too hard. We have today a 27,000-page federal tax code. Hundreds of new federal regulations are enacted every single year, and virtually never is a single regulation repealed. This represents a thicket of complexity that is simply impossible to navigate. A big business can navigate this. Big labor can navigate big government, but small businesses cannot. We need fundamental simplifying tax reform. We don't need to tweak our tax code just to get a budget deal, although it's important to get a budget deal. We need something fundamental that is vastly simplifying. My answer, lower every rate, close every loophole, but the fundamental truth is that we are literally choking the life out of the American economy, and we have the numbers that prove it. In order to get this economy back on its feet, in order for this country to be the beacon of hope and the shining city of the hill for so many, both those that are already here and people who dream of coming here someday, we need 3 other things as well: fundamental reforms. We need fundamental education reform. We've talked a lot about that in this conference, but let's remember what's really needed. We spend more money per pupil on education in this country than virtually every other country in the civilized world, and yet our results are poorer. We have increased the budget of the Department of Education for virtually every year in the last 40 years, and yet the quality of our education continues to deteriorate. Why? Because it isn't about how much money you spend. It's about how and where and on whom, and we know that the most important thing in order for a child to learn is a good teacher in the classroom, which means we must push for the opportunity for every parent to have a choice and every child to have a chance. We must deliver fundamental immigration reform. We need those high-skilled workers with a great degree, but we also need those folks who maybe don't have a higher degree but who have huge ambition and big dreams. We need a legal immigration system that works in this country because this is the century of brain power. And finally, we need fundamental innovation reform. Perhaps we'll talk about that with our panel, but it means that the government has to decide to play the right role in encouraging and fostering innovation, creating an environment where people can take a risk. And the right role for government most definitely is not to pick winners and losers and to try and act like a venture capitalist. They do a lousy job. This is the century. The 21st century is the century of brain power and innovation. And small business and entrepreneurship is where this starts. And so it is fundamental that as we look at the state of our economy going forward, that we think about small businesses and entrepreneurs first. That is why I'm so delighted to have the panel that we have here with us today. I'm going to invite each of them to come to the podium and give brief remarks, and then we'll engage in a conversation. So I will start by asking Susan Combs, our Comptroller from the state of Texas, to make a few remarks. Susan knows a thing or two about using technology to enforce transparency in government and to accelerate accountability. So Susan, please.
Well, I kept hearing a familiar name recently, John Galt, and I downloaded Atlas Shrugged on my iPad about 6 months ago and reread it and devoured it. And I'm pleased to tell all of you that John Galt is alive and well, and he's living in Texas. The book seems actually very modern and timely, and if you take a look at where we are with the economy, Washington is telling businesses everything they do is bad. They're causing harm, they need to be reined in, and of course, please leave everything to government. Now, I thought that when we came to this country several hundred years ago, we left the king behind. We certainly thought we did, until King Obama started his reign. Two things that I took away from the book that I think are important. Number one is some parts of the federal government hates successful businesses when they show it through tax or regulatory policy or extortion. Look at the EPA, the Endangered Species Act, and of course the NLRB dealing with Boeing. In the book, the best steel, the best railroads, the best of everything was torn down and given away to the worst and most incompetent. They had to turn over the fruits of ingenuity and imagination to those who can't do as well. And in the book, finally, Atlas shrugged. Atlas being the wonderful giants who kept the world going. They went on strike and then changed the world. Secondly, government is incapable of managing success. Look at today, it's been 4 years since Congress passed a budget. What would happen to your small business if you tried that approach? And by the way, to put it in context, can you imagine the White House trying to run Disney World? Well, let me retract that. It's certainly true that Joe Biden is out of central casting for Goofy. If we had Splash Mountain, and probably the Hall of Presidents would be shut down due to the sequester if the feds ran it. So why is John Galt happy to be living in Texas? 3 reasons. One is after our last recession, we diversified our economy, and we went from largely ag to oil and gas, and now we've opened it up to lots of entrepreneurs. Second point, it is true that capital will flee a hostile environment. Capital has a fear of risk, the regulatory rug being pulled out, and in Texas, we have a sharp eye on new regulations and policy, and we love to sue. We love to sue EPA, we love to sue the Obama administration on health care, voter ID, and we hope that keeps them on their toes. We certainly want the pro-business climate to be the engine of growth, and it does pay off. The Federal Reserve has a chart showing 22 years that Texas is leading the country. Third, rational government spending policies so you don't have to keep going back and extracting more taxes. Our state debt is the lowest of the 10 most populous states. Our rainy day fund allows us to even out our spending. We have a spending limit. We have a balanced budget, and we've cut our expenses. Now, the absolutely strong empirical proof of our success is what I call the U-Haul test. A U-Haul from Texas to California costs $1,693 one way. Going the other way, from Texas to California, going to California, there's no market demand. It's double that, and so that's why we are looking at California as DC in waiting. In Texas, we have tried to apply the lessons of business to managing the state, rather than, as this administration does, applying lessons of government or doing things badly to business. The feds can and do keep printing cash. When, not if, they get it wrong, they hire more people, add more rules, tighten the noose. Market forces drive out incompetence in the private sector everywhere except for Washington. So the lessons learned are big government is not your friend if you are a risk taker. What works is a spirit of entrepreneurship, innovation, etc., and people migrate to success. Number two, put as light a hand as possible on the government tillers. This applies to all levels, cities, counties, school districts, etc. And number third, engage in partnership with your citizens. Keep your books and your minds open. Be sure you don't fall in the DC trap. So come join all the John Galts who've made Texas their home. By the way, the operators at U-Haul are waiting for your call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And now I'd like to ask Congressman Pearce to take the podium. He is fighting the good fight in Capitol Hill and is a small business owner himself. Congressman.
Thank you, Carly, and appreciate it. I'm Steve Pearce. I represent the 2nd District of New Mexico. It's 34% Republican, 52% Hispanic, and they're hungry for the conservative values that we represent. You heard Susan describe Atlas, and the question for us today is, has Atlas shrugged? Now, to have a significant discussion about that, we first of all need to think about the two terms, potential and kinetic energy. You all know what potential is. We've all seen these kids at school that excel in athletics or maybe in the classroom, and we hope they live up to their potential. Actually, Washington, D.C., the Redskins are the home to one of the stories of potential versus kinetic energy. A kid that grew up in my hometown, Timmy Smith, we watched as he electrified audiences with his running ability in football through junior high and high school. Actually came here to play professional football, and in his rookie year had an outstanding year, culminated in the Super Bowl by setting a record, the all-time record for rushing in the Super Bowl by a rookie from my hometown. He demonstrated potential his whole life, and yet he went home 2 years later unable to capture that potential because he didn't have the kinetic energy to fulfill it, not the discipline. I just recently came back from South Sudan. As sad as the president slumped in his chair saying, "We're starving as a people. It's the newest country on earth. The country is broke. They're sitting on the potential of 350,000 barrels of oil a day. Yet they have no modern-day Atlas, no business owners, no one to come forward and say, we'll get that oil to market. And so they sit there starving on abundance because they have no kinetic energy. Is Atlas shrugging? Have they shrugged? Have the business owners and the entrepreneurs and the developers stepped back because the government is too strong? I'll just tell you a couple of stories from my district. Tom Hutchinson runs a local restaurant. Almost 100 years in the same family. It's paid for, it's solid. 110 employees, and he recently told me, after Obamacare comes into full action, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to keep all of our employees. 110 families depending on a small businessman who's being crushed by the regulations coming out of this town and by this president. In New Mexico, we have Navajo coal miners making $60,000 a year, but under President Obama, they are being sent to the House to live on government subsistence level checks. $60,000 a year, taxpayer gone, coming from the EPA, and the EPA admits that the rule they're implementing to silence those coal miners will not impact the environment enough to be seen by the human eye. Matt Allen. We used to have 123 timber mills in New Mexico processing timber from our national forest. Matt Allen was one of 123 today. He's the last one standing. He's down from 96 employees and dropped to a low of 12 because of government policies. I will tell you that the American government is crushing American businesses. They're crushing the middle class. The genius of America is being silenced. Our best performers are giving up. The hardest workers are walking away. Businesses are our hope for the future. They're our hope for our healthy economy. And they're looking at a government and wondering what's going on. Businesses are the thing that separate us from being South Sudan. We have had all the potential in America, and our kinetic energy has realized it. And yet that kinetic energy is being silenced by a government. Has Atlas shrugged? I can't answer that. I can say that Atlas is shrugging. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
And last but certainly not least, we have Jeanette Hernandez Prenger. She is an entrepreneur, a small business owner in the IT services business, a space close to my heart. Jeanette, please.
Thank you, Carly. Well, it's kind of daunting to be standing in front of you and the two people in front of me, their first part of their name started with honorable. And why am I standing here? Because I'm one of 23 million other Americans who own a small business. Like many of you and other stories that we heard, I am the product of an immigrant, a father who is Mexican, a mother who is Portuguese, the staunchest conservatives you will ever find, who believed if you worked hard, you did the best that you could be anything you want to be. As a small business owner, I take great pride in offering benefits to my employees. Over the years, I've grown year after year, doing the right things. I've grown organically. I didn't take on debt that I couldn't afford. I provided great benefits for my employees. This panel is so important, asking, has Atlas shrugged? Are we producing the right type of rewards for the risks that we take? How many business owners wonder, why am I doing this? My parents had a dream that their children would have a better life than they did. That dream came true. Each and every one of us 6 children have college educations. I have a sister who's a doctor. I have a business headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri. With an office in DC, I employ over 150 people nationwide providing technology services. I love what I do. I love seeing people thrive, be successful, be able to provide for their families. But I have 3 issues that all business owners are facing. Has Atlas shrugged? When we produce so much and work so hard and take so many risks to have it taken away. I can talk about the taxes. Anybody who has a pay stub in December can take a look at their January pay stub and see the difference. I won't even begin to tell you what it means to a small business owner or the S corporation, where it flows into their personal income. And instead of being rewarded for saving, for operating reserves, for putting aside for a rainy day, those are taken away. Healthcare. I have over 150 people working across the country. To compete with the big companies who also do what I do, I have to provide very good services, very good health care and benefits so I can attract talent, a workforce that is going to compete with the big boys. Today, my check for my premiums out of my company is $21,000 a month. January of 2014, 3 days ago, I sat down with my health care benefits provider, and he told me that check will go from $21,000 a month to $58,000 a month. No more additional revenue. That is all going to hit the bottom line. Has Atlas shrugged? Taking away those profits and imposing regulations, taxes, additional policies that stifle creativity, that don't reward the good behaviors. I could go into bankruptcy, go into debt, overspend. I'd get a bailout. And in 7 years, I could start all over again. I don't think those are the type of things that we want to reward. We want to be able to have those 23 million small businesses continue to thrive and create jobs and keep America strong. Thank you.
So I think it's fair to say, if you listen to everyone up here, I think it's fair to say that we are concerned that Atlas is perhaps in the process of shrugging. And so I want to ask each of our panelists the following question. One of the things that always impresses me about Washington, D.C. is that it's designed for organizations that are big. You know, big business can navigate through all of this. Big labor can navigate through all of this. Here we're talking about entrepreneurs and small business owners who are the lifeblood of this economy, and they can't navigate through Washington, D.C. So I want to frame this question. What do we think it would take to reorient the mindset here in Washington from let's talk about everything big to let's talk about what it will take to unleash the smallest of our businesses? What would it take to change that mindset? And I'm going to start with the congressman because he is fighting the good fight and just succeeded in preventing one more EPA regulation from getting through. And then we'll go to our other panelists.
Your question is actually the perfect one because big business can hire more lawyers, they can hire more accountants.
Lobbyists.
The small people are getting killed. I was sitting next to a young lady about a year ago. She said, I just wanted to have a venue here in Maryland. And she said the permits were too numerous. And she said, I finally gave up. A small business person giving up because they couldn't hire a lawyer, couldn't hire the lobbyist, whatever. Small businesses are not being able to send anyone to the White House to get the waiver from Obamacare, so they're at a competitive disadvantage. I will tell you that what I believe the cure is, and it's not very popular here, but I have a bill called the Virtual Congress. Put us in Congress back home among the people. We can vote virtually on almost every bill. Big bills would come in here. But that, if you change the process, thank you, if you change the process, then you would change the outcome. If we were closer to the small businesses than the lobbyists, I will guarantee you small businesses would have a better day.
What a great answer. And you know, I'm always reminded when we vote for things like American Idol, I mean, we have the technology to vote for everything, anything. Certainly congresspeople could vote from home. Jeanette?
You know, I keep close to my congressmen and my senators. I do a lot with my city, my state, because I want those elected officials, I don't care what party they belong to, I want them to work for me. Those are my tax dollars that are paying for them in the offices that they sit in. And I make sure that they understand those things that make me excited about the business that I work in and what I'm doing. And they also understand those hardships, not just for myself, but my employees, and making sure that we are able to take those dollars and put them right back into the community and to create more.
Susan?
I would add one more thing. I think Congress generally has been so reluctant to give up the money that if you did do more block grants, then you can at least go meet your person in the grocery store. If it's block granted back, it is an impenetrable wall trying to get up here, land up here, and see people. I think all the money should go back to people who paid for it.
You know, one of the things that I've been engaged in over the last several years is trying to get more small business owners engaged, more engaged in the political process because the political process is strangling them. And one of the answers that I get back from small business owners all the time is, you know what, Carly, I'm just too busy. I'm too busy making my business go. And it's a completely reasonable answer. It's hard to make a living, and Jeanette told us some great stories. So my second question is this: what do we think would happen if, you know, we've mobilized all kinds of people to march on the mall? What would happen, and what would it take if millions of small business owners came and marched on the National Mall to say, you are strangling us. You are choking the life out of the American economy, which is indeed what is happening today. Could that be done? What do we think the impact of that would be?
I'll eat it.
Okay, we have a volunteer. And Congressman, what do you think would happen if we had millions of small business owners who showed up one day on the National Mall and said, you know, this is our country too, you're choking us to death?
Okay, I'm sorry. We have led 4 or 5 of these marches in New Mexico. The government was going to list a sand dunes sagebrush lizard last year, which would have shut down the oil and gas, would have taken about a 20% off of the taxes that are paid in New Mexico. And so I asked people to march in the street, and almost 1,000 showed up. We were at the hearing. There were more people outside than inside, about 400 inside, about 600 outside. The organizers came up and said, Mr. Pearce, they're kind of testy out there. Would you go visit with them? I said, visit with them? Hell, I'm going to give them your home phone number, man. You're trying to kill their jobs. Anyway, we must be speaking up like you're talking about, Carly. I'm on the same page with you.
Susan.
Well, I marched for the first time in my life in summer of 1993. for private property rights, there was a proposal to designate 33 million acres of central Texas as critical habitat for the golden cheek warbler and the black-cap vireo. My point is, every single person is responsive to the level of interest. I think people should march, but I think there should be virtual town halls. I think there ought to be ways for you to send your vote in. If you cannot come, you should not be disenfranchised from being heard. So I think we should try every single method of getting people to listen.
Yeah. You know, one of the great opportunities we have comes from technology. Everything that you all are talking about, technology makes possible. Technology allows us to vote on anything. Technology creates the opportunity for virtual conversations, virtual town hall meetings. It's absolutely critical. Another question. We know that today there is a lot of talk about a possible budget deal. We've heard all about the Obama charm offensive. We've heard all about maybe somewhere in here there's a tax deal. Let me express a concern and then get each of our panelists to comment. My concern is that we will tinker around the edges of the tax code in order to get a deal, and we will miss perhaps a really important opportunity to do something bold and fundamental. As I mentioned, 27,000-page tax code. We're not even talking about regulations. We're just talking about the tax code. We're strangling people with this. We know that Simpson-Bowles pushed for fundamental tax reform, perhaps not as simplifying as we're talking about. What do we think it would take to get people to actually consider, in both parties, to get people to actually consider fundamental, radical simplification of the tax code with the small business owner, not the big corporation, in mind? And I'm going to put the congressman on the spot to start as well.
The American people, Democrats and Republicans, keep in mind I represent 2 non-Republicans for every Republican I represent. Americans are hungry for us to sit down and work together. Here in Washington, a few of us backbenchers are actually going to dinner together, Democrats, Republicans, and one of the subjects I'm bringing up is exactly this, the tax code for corporations. The president has said in the last 2 states of the union before this that it needs to be reformed, that we're the second highest in the world. Japan since then has lowered theirs, and we now are winning a race we should not be winning. So I think that the American people are already ready for that to occur. It's now up to us in Washington to sit down across the aisles and begin to work the details out. I'll tell you that many people think we're this far apart until we sit down over dinner and we realize that we can tolerate these differences. We can close the gap. It's absolutely essential.
Well, I'm encouraged that you sound optimistic, perhaps.
Don't know, optimism is hard to come by in Washington, but we're working the hell out of it.
Well, good. Jeanette, how about you? You spoke so compellingly in your remarks about the difficulties of not just expenses, but the tax code on your business.
Right. There's a lot of small businesses that are S corporations, which means that the money that you save, the revenue, and then goes into profits, those are taxed. And they're taxed as personal income. I don't really get to spend that money. If I do, I could go into debt very quickly. I could overspend. I would not be able to sustain my business during hard times. So the tax code actually punishes that type of entity. Small business owners, a lot of people, we want to pay a fair share. That's all we want is a fair share. Right now, big companies have the loopholes. Big corporations have loopholes. They're able to have the lawyers and the consultants and so forth to take advantage of things that maybe reduce their taxes. Small business like mine does not. And it shows in the way we are able to reinvest those dollars because we can't afford to bring on additional people. So we're looking at a tax code that's fair and at the same time rewards those for saving and being able to reinvest in our companies.
You know, to Jeanette's point, the truth is that big businesses, and I used to run one, big businesses pay a much lower effective tax rate than small businesses because big businesses have the wherewithal, the skills to exploit all those loopholes, to lobby in some cases for those loopholes. So we can get all upset about Warren Buffett's tax rate. The tax rate we really ought to be getting upset about, I think, is the tax rate that small businesses and entrepreneurs pay. Susan, you have very effectively use technology to force transparency in government. You've done something pretty common sense but quite radical in your own way. Let's actually put expenses up for everybody to see. You're suggesting that small business ought to be as transparent, government ought to be as transparent as a small business. What do you think about the tax code, and are some of your techniques to drive transparency helpful, perhaps?
I'm the state tax collector for Texas, and there is this incredible gulf between the people who pay and the people who get the money, like me, because they don't believe it's fair. They have no clue how to do it. Their accountant tells them to do it, and they think it's somehow gamed. So I think it has to be so well understood by every person that they then say, okay, I'm not getting the shaft. Second thing is, the fourth day I was on the job 6 years ago, I put up the expenses of my agency down to the pencil level. How many pencils we bought, and we've done that to the state of Texas. If people can understand, it's a big deal, but if people can see that, but right now I've got 2 bills working in the state legislature in Texas to put on the ballot. Every time you go to borrow more money on the ballot, it will tell you how much you already owe, and I can't tell you how many governmental entities are coming out to oppose it. They don't want you to know. So what you have to say is, it's your money, you're entitled to know, you're paying the freight, and that should be true at every single level, city, county, school district, federal government. It's always their money.
Yeah, it's really a good point. And of course, it's impossible to understand something that's overly complex. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm just going to start with Jeanette, but given all of this conversation, what else would you like to say to the audience? What would you like people to think about and know as they're leaving? Because so many people over the last 3 days have said we need to keep up the fight. I believe we must fight for small business and entrepreneurship if we want this economy to be healthy and vibrant again. So, Jeanette, what do you want people to think about as they leave here today?
If you haven't read the book, Atlas Shrugged, read it. If you have read it, read it again. It's eye-opening to see where our government is going. Every one of us had parents who wanted a better future for their children, just like I want for my children, my grandchildren. Read Atlas Shrugged and think about the policies we have in place today and what that could mean to the future generations.
Great. Thank you. Congressman?
We're trying to engage women. Women make most of the decisions in healthcare, education, the spending of budgets, and so we're having women's meetings, and we're trying to make those virtual. One of the most powerful things that we talk about there is Reboot America. I think we should do what Susan says and make every budget transparent and let the American people, through technology with 5-star ratings, we all see it on eBay, everything is recognized, rate and defund those things by their votes from their computer. Absolutely, Americans are excited when they think they can take part.
Don't push the tough decisions off to your children and grandchildren. Man up, take responsibility, and take care of it today.
Please join me in thanking a fantastic panel. Thank you all.